to talk about his new book, The Promise of Sunrise, Finding Solace in a Broken World. The format tonight's going to be very simple, very brief intro, and our guest has the floor, and hopefully we'll have time for Q&A. And that's it. Oh, and then there are books for sale, and they'll sign them up here. I do want to thank the Yankee Bookshop for co-hosting this event and bringing books, and also WCTV for filming it. They post the films, the videos on their site, and we post them on ours, so you can share them with friends or review anything we went over. So, tonight, we welcome Ted Levin. He's a zoologist, a photographer, and an award-winning author. He has worked at the Bronx Zoo, as well as the Montclair Museum, and taught at Antioch, and just returned from leading a group in Costa Rica to name just a few of his gigs. His essays have appeared in a long list of publications, including Audubon, the New York Times, Sierra, Sports Illustrated, and some of you may recognize his name from past pages of the Valley News, where he had a regular column, or commentary pieces on VPR, which ended a while ago, I believe. And his photographs illustrate several children's books that were written by Frank Ash. If you haven't ever seen those, it's worth seeking them out. Ted has previously published other books set in various locales. Backtracking, The Way of a Naturalist is more around here. Bloodbrook is quite local. Bloodbrook, A Naturalist's Home Ground. Liquid Land, A Journey Through the Florida Everglades, and America's Snake, The Rise and Fall of the Timber Rattler Snake, that came out in 2016, which is actually the last time I saw Ted. I look forward to learning more about this new book, which is the product of time spent exploring the hillside around his home during the long isolation days of the pandemic. Please join me in welcoming Ted Levin.
Thank you, Liza. Please don't let me forget my sunglasses, which I'm very apt to do. So this was an inadvertent book. It was a book that was never planned. My other books were books that I dreamed about doing. My agent found an outlet for the publication. This was a way to keep myself from going stir crazy in a house alone in Thetford for 18 months. And I didn't know, I really didn't have any goal of creating a book. What I had a goal for doing was keeping myself sane. And every morning I would go for a walk, and I'd write about my walk, and I decided I'd key in on the sunrise times and check how sunrise times changed over the course of the 18 months, and I just did it day by day, 526 days. And it was 6 months into it that a friend of mine said, "I think you have a book here." And it was 3 years of editing that I came up with a book. But it was never planned to be that way in the beginning. And what I'd like to do is start by reading the prologue, which kind of addresses where I was at the very beginning of doing this project. And then I have a few little snips along the way to read. After the prologue, I'll tell you how the rest of the book is set up. Every one of the pieces in here, and it's done journalistically, is set off with an epigram. And I'm an inveterate collector of quotes and have been doing so for decades. And this is Albert Einstein introducing my prologue. The pursuit of truth and beauty is a sphere of activity in which we are permitted to remain children all our lives. And that really underscores everything I did in this book. Never exactly planning it that way, but that's the way it really turned out. I boarded a crowded plane in the wee hours of the 14th of March, 2020. Having just spent 12 days in Costa Rica, ignoring the media, in the company of 14 naturalists, hummingbirds, macaws, and rainbow-colored frogs, I wasn't disquieted by the mention of COVID-19. the coronavirus was an Asian problem, a European problem, remote from the remoteness of jungle twilight and enhancement of bright green moths. I just finished guiding a nature tour with my Costa Rican friend Gil Calvo Morea. Gil has piloted 6 tours with me in the past 20 years. He's ample, affable, highly energetic, an ambassador for everything Costa Rican, a natural history historian par excellence. Like a godwit migrating over open ocean, Gil imbues unshakable confidence and self-acceptance. He laughs easily, leads tours with lighthearted dignity, and molds strangers into friends, friends into family, family into a nucleus of one. Our family ate together, hiked together, debated the identity of unknown birds and butterflies, watched a resplendent quetzal stir the dawn with long green pendant plumes, each as thin as a twizzle stick. After 12 days, we had become acculturated, assimilated, associated, a tender mobile unit verging on dispersal. Then our sad goodbyes. My God, we had no idea what was behind the curtain. So I flew from San Jose to Panama City to Miami International Airport, and it was in the airport that I realized something was afoul. And then I'll continue here. Travel weary and virus conscious, I reached East Central Vermont late that afternoon. In the interest of a ventilator-free existence, my personal geography shrank. I was a self-employed, free-ranging naturalist at home in an empty house. I sheltered in place until the 15th of April, 2021, 13 months, 394 days, 9,456 hours, 567,360 minutes, but who's counting? Drifting between rooms, discovering the joy and frustrations of Zoom, I taught myself to make graham cracker crust, seared scallops, shrimp rolls, garlic-encrusted cod, ginger salmon, and chicken and cider. To stay mentally and emotionally afloat, to create order through repetition and output, I tried to be a homebound Joe DiMaggio, dependable, productive, generating a seemingly unstoppable string of hits, but with a much better eye for wildlife. In time, notwithstanding urgencies mounted, I began to hate my furniture, notably the living room sofa and the dining room table, and I craved physical contact, especially after the Colorado birth of my granddaughter, Isabel Linney. Nonetheless, the landscape of COVID-19's new normal offered me a comforting prospect directly in my sightline. To stave off boredom and favor creativity, I immersed myself in the arc of time. I walked at sunrise daily, tapping notes in my cell phone that I recast into journal posts for 2 birding listservs, one regional, the other statewide. Unconsciously, I had re-engaged the zen of stillness, the spin of the earth as sensed from a corner of a single valley, feasting on the vagaries of dawn and the delicacies of the seasons, German shepherds on leashes, tails in compliance. I'd walk downhill along a curving dirt road, past rocky streams and fallen trees, and gaze across an unblemished marsh and a man-made pond, looking deeply into a landscape I thought I knew. I fed off sunrise like a dog at dawn for nearly 400 consecutive days, then left for Colorado to meet my granddaughter, and when I returned, like DiMaggio, I began another streak. Encouraged by friends, the journal evolved into a blog, I hate that word, called Homeboy at Home during the coronavirus, published in the Substack newsletter. 1 hour walking, looking, considering, then 4 or 5 hours of writing. My morning activities had centered me, had given me purpose and order, beauty, an outlet for my emotions, something I look forward to during a time clouded with uncertainty. Homeboy grew a small, loyal following. Once a week, a regional online newsletter called Daybreak posted the link. Friends of friends began to forward Homeboy, which eventually appeared in the inboxes of homebound readers in more than 20 states and foreign countries. I chronicled the vagaries of dawn, the writer interpreting the wind. I gained a sense of purpose in a time of purposelessness. Process yielded outcome, and I craved both. Both were inextricably linked. Walking begot writing, writing begot an audience that nourished me with correspondence. I read what readers suggested. Faulkner, Oliver, Barry, Whitman, Boylan, Sachs, and Max Boyce, a lockdown Irish poet who lamented the restrictions imposed by COVID in a poem called Just When the Tide Went Out. And Penny McConnell was the one who turned me on to Max Boyce, Liza. Bewitched by sunlight and clouds, my quarantining at home had become more heartfelt than heartache, more joyous than tragic, more centering than scattering. To reacquaint with the little things long ignored and the bigger things long taken for granted, I entered the ongoing saga of my valley, ceiling to floor. It became a collateral gift of staying put. I began to engage my home ground with childlike awareness, the open-eyed observer, awed by the ordinary, stunned by the exotic. Cedar waxweeds eating blackberries became provisional art. A bobcat in the alders became sacred. Every walk had been substantially different, each an endless manuscript multi-authored by clouds, trees, flowers, streams, mammals, amphibians, turtles, and birds, edited by the seasons and the earthly trends, some surreptitious, some blatant, some mysterious. Snakes made cameo appearances, solemn as prophets unspooling on the fringe of the narrative. Insects hijacked some of the many plot lines. Narrative threads like cloudscapes, unstable and ever-evolving. Things too small to describe may have composed the ending. Although I saw a very small part of my valley, its improbable and dependable details, what tethered me to these walks was the predictability of change, fathomless, reassuring commodity, and when I returned home, the joy and struggle of trying to express what I saw and felt, what it all evoked. I tried to channel the vitality of the morning, to paint with words, to freely associate, to hack through the underbrush of my own history. Chickadees, companionable and busy, cinched the seasons. When one sang on a frigid January morning, thin breaths rising like smoke, I glimpsed spring, a gray feathered promise. Snapping turtles, goshawks, and loons took stage in the wings, sometimes commandeering my attention in absentia. I roamed the valley for more than a year, happily engaged in a second childhood of my own making, witnessing and participating in the profound and gorgeous forces of life, thriving on the consistency of ritual. So that's more or less what I did. And this next brief piece I'll read is just a lay of the land I walked so you can get a sense of it. It's called A Brief History of Place. In October 1997, Linny and I and our boys, Casey 10 and Jordan 2, moved to a geographic bump on the eastern flank of Robinson Hill, within the village of Thetford Center in the town of Thetford in a county called Orange. Surrounded by overproductive oaks and underproductive lawn, our house looked down on 65 acres of marsh, a fusion of unkept reeds and isles of sweetgale, a drainage basin for both water and cold air. Channels laced the marsh, peppered the pools, paved with boot-sucking mud. Several dead pines, barkless and branchless, entice raptors to pause, to gather thoughts and ignite the valley with primeval cries. Not a house marred our view, yet Thetford Elementary School is only 4 miles away, the interstate a mile farther. Linny loved the landscape, and when the property, for nearly 20 years, when the property was rumored to be for sale, she planned and pounced, and so for 24 years I've lived in the company of bitterns. 5 miles to the east, the Connecticut River separates Vermont from New Hampshire, a 400-mile-long south-flowing umbilicus that drains 4 states and feeds Long Island Sound with scraps of our valley. Less than a mile to the north, Lake Fairleigh hosts 5 historic summer camps. I'm close enough to the village of Post Mills to hear church bells and the combustible sigh of hot air balloons that launch from the tiny airport between the cemetery and the Little League field. On a clear day, 40 miles southeast, Mount Ascutney teases the horizon, more afterthought than keynote, far beyond the domination of Gove Hill, which lords over Thetford. The slightest haze screens Ascutney. The sun and the morning star set over Guile Mountain. Although labeled Gillette Swamp on the United States Geologic Lime Survey quadrangle, Casey and Geordie renamed our valley Coyote Hollow because wild dogs sang on the night we moved in. Hemming the marsh, technically an intermediate fen, peaty, alkaline, nutrient poor, are alders along the east and north, evergreens along the west and south. 2 brooks flow off the western face of Robinson Hill, another off the steeper, rockier eastern face, and unload their freight in the marsh. All 3 braid together into the main channel, which bisects the marsh before pouring out the wreckage of an old beaver dam and coalescing into an unnamed brook that feeds the east branch of the Pompanousek River, 2 miles away. We moved to Coyote Hollow in 1997. The water level was much higher. Beaver, a keynote species as important to the Northeast as bison were to the Great Plains, had incised a dozen shallow passages in the peat and maintained the outlet dam, which backed up along the edge of our lower pasture. Casey and I snorkeled the main channel, 4 feet deep and decorated with water lilies. Jordan drifted behind us, directed traffic from a kayak. Back then, marsh wrens and snipe nested in the cattails. 7 muskrat houses rose out of the reeds. Mink birthed in a derelict beaver lodge. On spring nights, windows open, I'd fall asleep serenaded by snipe and bittern. Windows didn't need to be open to hear frogs, 6 different species. Wandering moose grazed water lilies, wandering eagles and ospreys studied the water anticipating fish, which were scarce and tiny. Migrating kestrels hawked dragonflies and then fed on the wing or hovered above the reeds, laser eyes searching. Flying ants lured southbound nighthawks, and on one cold December morning, an orbiting golden eagle took the measure of Coyote Hollow. When their food supply dwindled, the beavers left. Water levels fell, which ended kayaking and snorkeling. Wrens and snipes and muskrats moved on. I haven't seen a moose in years. Bitterns, frogs, red-shouldered hawks stayed. Itinerant otter and mink still follow the brooks. Deer still roam the interior of the marsh and fawn on the Sweetgale Isles. Barred owls and coyotes continue to underscore the night and give weight to the stars. My boys grew up in Coyote Hollow, played baseball, made music, helped in the garden, mowed the lawn, stacked wood, fed the horses, the chickens, the dogs, caught frogs and snakes and smiling salamanders with cosmetic spots, netted hatchling turtles, threaded worms on fish hooks, watched fledgling grosbeaks beg for sunflower seeds. The boys hid beer in the woodpile, weed in the closet, behaved appropriately and inappropriately. Their boyhood triumphs and disappointments unfolded here, bloomed and faded like orchids. Coyote Hollow was their home ground as the beaches and green belts and window wells of Long Island had been mine. Casey and Jordan moved on to pursue their own dreams, to build their own lives. Linny died. On the 14th of March, 2020, just home from Costa Rica, I faced an empty house with a view, prepared to shelter in place unaccompanied. A nature writer whose last day job had been during the Nixon administration, who had freely roamed the hemisphere, a confidant of polar bears and eyelash vipers. Who among us, hunkered down at home, alone in the shadow of COVID, hollowed out and exhausted, hadn't longed for a hug after dark? I have a girlfriend with hazel eyes and a broad, fetching smile, an excellent fit for our similarities and differences. COVID tempered our relationship. When the pandemic landed, we had already been dating for 3 years. As a social worker, Nancy's work was deemed essential, and when I returned home from Costa Rica, our relationship was mostly limited to incinerating the phone lines. When we got together, we were outside, socially distanced, until vaccines had arrived. Sitting around our front yards or wandering the back roads, inside we wore masks, barely touched, no exceptions. To compensate, I embraced the hills and the valley, the corrugated world I hadn't fully embraced in many years. To be clear, based on a pair of books I had written while living in the Hollow, I knew more about the Florida Everglades than I did about my own wetlands. Had associated more with timber rattlesnakes than with my own dooryard birds. But stuck at home for more than a year, I began to take solace from the rising sun, became a student, again, of a landscape so personal that sometimes it hurt to recall my own history. But chickadees, bless them, taught me to pivot. I became the beneficiary of chance and hope, saw myself again, flawed but striving, at play in a gorgeous and brittle world, underwritten by joy and sadness, dependency and change. So from this point to the epilogue, I'm I don't use every single day that I wrote. I combined some days, I jettisoned some days, I expanded some days, but it goes chronologically except for the introduction, which is day 161, and that will show the shape of what all is to follow. And what I did is I mentioned the time of sunrise and how it compared to the day before. I mentioned the temperature, the wind direction. I passed intermittent streams and 2 permanent streams, an upper and a lower, and I described what I saw, how much water was there, what creatures were hip-hopping around there. Then the marsh I talked about, and then the pond I talked about, and every day it was different. And then I came home and thought about what I saw and tried to flesh it out and add something personal or something that I might have read as a child or an adult that seemed to fit in with that particular theme. And so I'm going to read you in its entirety, day 161. And from that point on, I'm just going to read you little bits and pieces, a paragraph here and a paragraph there, to give you more of a flavor of the various things that were evoked. And I did move to Hartford in the middle of all this, which is, I now live on Hurricane Hill, and that kind of ends the story. I'm there for about a month and a half writing, and I've resumed writing again for Substack, but I only do it once or twice a week now, because I can go outside and do other things and get in my car and go places. Okay, so this is the introduction, and Jennifer Fournier did the illustration. She did a beautiful watercolor cover, and she did a playful Winnie the Pooh-esque map of me with my 2 German shepherds, and I don't ever mention their name in the entire book until the acknowledgments. But rest assured, they kept me focused because they needed to go out, and that started the whole process. So anyway, this is an introduction. It's day 161, the 25th of August, 2020, and this is a quote from Robert Frost. And this is Linny's 69th birthday. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. 6:05 a.m., sunrise 1 minute later than yesterday, 63 degrees, wind south-southeast, 3 miles an hour. Sky, dispensing ground fog lifts, unveiling a lightly rubbled heaven, a mix of overexposed blue and wool white, hints of peach across the west, permanent streams, upper jittery flow, flickering light, running out of water, lower, a single worried puddle, emblem of the parched summer, wetlands, mist softened colors across the marsh, a tree falls, fracturing the lullaby of the breeze, pond, sands mist, sands almost everything, no otter, no hooded merganser, no bitterns, except for errant methane bubbles and a lone turtle, a black shiny disc with little web feet rising and sinking, a reptilian marionette. Frogs press against the shoreline like S&H green stamps to their pages. And boy, does that date me. Crickets, early morning's metronome. AOR, and that's my abbreviation for Alive on the Road, something I got from an essay in the New Yorker that John McPhee wrote in the early 70s called Travels in Georgia. He kept using the term DOR for dead on the road because he and the woman he was traveling with were eating roadkills. So I never forgot DOR, and I've added to that AOR. 2 little brown bats, constricted figure eights above the front yard, trolling for flying insects and ants, mosquitoes, survivors of their own pandemic, a solitary tricolored bat, a very tiny, tiny bat, busily erratic, courses above the treetops, looks like a hummingbird moth, a flesh-winged spark combing insects out of fertile airways, tricolored bat, once known as the eastern pipistrelle, and little brown bat, both victims of white nose syndrome, ignored social distancing at their own peril. Sound familiar? Chickadee rips breakfast out of a dewy spider web, then sings. Reminds me of midwinter when spring was a dream. Why sing when the hollow braces for autumn? 3 peewees join in. Slurred whistles, dampened version of their plaintive summer song, equally longing, equally sad, simple to mimic. First winter wren I've heard in more than 2 months, a truncated version of the effervescent piccolo, which, when blended with the drumming of a far-off pileated, ushers me back to early May when the mornings were colder and bird songs hotter. Winter wren and pileated, the fife and drum corps, an unexpected engagement, catbird meows. Another pulse of red-breasted nuthatches passes through the coyote hollow. Nasal calls roll off tree trunks like a flock of tricycle horns. Ovenbird, first I've heard in more than a month, sings, a clipped version of teacher, 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 more like teach, 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 an encouraging note on the threshold of the weirdest school year I can remember. Today's Linny's birthday. She would have been 69. When she died, I mourned what the boys had lost and lamented their absence from our lives, a litany of inconsolable everyday losses, my sorrow often masked by immersion in family survival. I skated around the death of hope, staggeringly fragile, avoiding as best I could, dwelling on my personal loss, the closest of friends, companion, confidant, a fellow explorer of the recesses of the world. Oh, how I missed her burnt toast, her infectious laugh as buoyant and contagious, but I had a ship to write and boys to grow. Casey and Jordan loved to travel, and for the most part, they were easy to travel with. Few complaints or outlandish requests. From the time they were infants, we took them everywhere. They nursed themselves to sleep in tents from Alaska to Newfoundland to the desert Southwest. A hint of campfire smoke lingered on their outdoor clothes. When Casey was 5 on a boardwalk in Florida, he lured a barred owl by hooting to within 5 feet of his bicycle seat. Jordan had never met a frog or a snake he didn't like, and he broadcast enthusiasm when he'd ever discovered a strange-looking insect. Although the boys loved the wonders of nature and appreciated life's grand diversity, for quite a while after their mother died, I hardly took them anywhere. Whenever we traveled as a family, Linny had been the organizer, the program director. I had been the consultant, the mule, the cheerleader. She would remember the toys, the books, the snacks, the toenail clippers. After Linny died, life without a compass seemed best lived closer to home. Travel did return to our lives, often with a vengeance, but the sense of loss still lingers. Yesterday, Casey and Becky, daughter-in-law Becky, texted me the sonogram of a fetal heartbeat. I longed to see Linny's irrepressible smile one more time, rising like the tide of the news she'd be a grandmother. 3 Phoebe chicks in our front yard apple tree, wings drooped, mouths quivering, cranked open, sunrise colors, begging, begging, begging. I stop and watch Phoebe Destiny, mostly moths, a steady progression, a seasonal harvest. No matter how much I ache, I can't suppress smiling. Time has a way of passing, of blunting loss, casting light across dark shadows, uncoiling the future. So the other little pieces I was going to read are just going to be little paragraphs from the days, but every day starts the way that day started, with the time of sunrise, its comparison to the day before, time-wise, and how the sky is different, how the birds are different, what they're doing. And I can assure you, no 2 days are ever the same. I mean, there's similar casts of characters, but there were great surprises. One morning, my dogs were sitting, minding their business, and I looked down and a bobcat was walking 20 feet away from me on the edge of the marsh. And that led to 3 days of writing about the bobcat, following his tracks and exploring where he went. And along the way, he met a Mrs. Bobcat, and they went off together. It was, yeah, and I saw the cat for all of, I bet you not 15 seconds. And I'm still thinking about it today, 5 years later. So that gives you the sense of how this is set up. And, you know, and I jump back and something triggers my job history and from what I watched. So there's a lot of things woven into it. It's certainly a journal. It's certainly a natural history in the rawest form of the description. But it's also a memoir, and it's also a reflection. What it isn't is, it's not terribly political, but you'd probably get an insight of where my politics might lie, just here and there. But believe me, I don't dwell on it. Everybody else seems to. So, if anybody has any questions at all, I have no problems being interrupted. So I'm jumping over to day 127, the 22nd of July, 2020, and this is the quote from Carl Sagan. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So a couple of days I wrote about Comet Neweiss. Remember Comet Neweiss? It came through in the summer of 2020 in the midst of COVID. We had it for about 3 weeks. So last night after 10 o'clock, I stood on a bridge over the outlet of Lake Fairley and watched Comet Neweiss low in the northeast. A smudge in unmarred emptiness, a fuzzball with a dimly lit squirrel's tail, headed west towards Colorado, towards Casey and Becky. I watched the comet and thought of them on the edge of Colorado National Monument, under star-spangled heaven, dark as my cellar. Comet perfect landscape, like Vermont nights. Comet Neweiss last passed this way 6,800 years ago, just after the discovery of cheese. Back then, lions prowled the British Isles and leopards Greece. Steppe bison roamed Alaska, dwarf woolly mammoths Wrangel Island in the Bering Sea, jaguars Florida, miniature elephants the Mediterranean Isles, ground sloths Cuba, Hawaii was an unpeopled island chain. South Florida was underwater. Fresh from glacial refuges off the Carolina coast, timber rattlesnakes headed back. Back then, nobody rode a horse or ate rice. So much has happened in 6,800 years, a geologic blink. So much happened in the past 4 months, a deplorable misstep. Where are the 3 wise men on camels? And a paragraph out of day 130, and again, it's Carl Sagan. We are like butterflies who flutter for a day and think it's forever. I watched the comet again last night over the bridge, over the outlet flow of Lake Fairley. A crescent moon sank behind Gove Hill. Jupiter and its entourage of satellites rose in the southeast. The comet appeared midway below the Big Dipper's ladle, a woolly core with a 1,000,000-mile debris trail, a cosmic dust bunny stretched across an unfathomable distance. Makes me feel small, ego reduction from the dawn of the universe. Owl hoots, loon wails. I lean against the warm car, humbled by the illusion of distance and the tragedy of time, freeloading like the birds in my yard. So did anybody go see Comet Neweiss when it came? No, it was really just a smudge, but to know that the last time it was visible from Earth was 6,800 years ago is pretty remarkable. And my son Casey was the one who got me to get out of bed and do that. I'm early to bed and early to rise. So this is the conclusion of a piece called, it's day 321, and it's the 1st of February, 2021. And this is a quote from Ludwig von Beethoven, "Take fate by the throat." And this is a little story that it could only happen in Vermont. 2 weeks ago, Linny's friend Ginger called. She wanted Becky and Casey's address. The baby was due in 5 weeks, and she had a gift to send them. When the sweater arrived, Becky called me, her voice breaking. The hooded wool sweater, dark blue with intricate bands of reds, whites, and browns, had been more than 2 decades in the making. Linny began knitting it in the late 1990s, a gift for an expectant co-worker. She died before it was finished. The woman moved away, storing the uncompleted sweater for 23 years. When she heard that Casey and Becky were expecting, she shipped the sweater to Ginger, who traded homemade soup to a neighbor to finish the knitting. 2 chickadees whistle high and sweet. We both know the bright light of the future lies beyond the northeaster. Adrift in the vagaries of time, I embrace benevolence, the goodness of some people, as a long-forgotten circle completes itself, as a grandmother lovingly and unknowingly gifts her grandchild. And there's another addition to the family, and Aiden, now 2, wears that same sweater. Let's see, so this is day 462, and this is just the last graph of the day, and it's more or less about moving. And this is day 462, the 22nd of June, 2021, 2 days after the summer solstice, 8 days left in Coyote Hollow, and this is, I'm sure this is going to be familiar to everybody, it's a Joni Mitchell quote. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on a carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look back behind from where we came, go round and round and round in a circle game. So this is the last graph. Cattails wake me up at first light, everywhere and vocal, the jazz riff of the hollow. There are many more this year than last. Phoebe chicks on the pasture fence, tails flicking, intolerant. Yellow, black, and white, an evening grosbeak stops at the bird feeders, empty now for a week. Checks for sunflower seeds in the hollow plastic tube. A prisoner of its own history, visiting a once dependable food source. Phantom feeding station like phantom limb triggers visceral memory. Besides oxygen uptake, the grosbeak and I have something else in common. At night, I go to read in a chair no longer there. And this final piece is, oddly enough, from my acknowledgments, which I wrote more than a year after I completed the book. And I set it up just like another entry with the day, the time, the weather. And this is just the end of it, which more or less sums up my year and a half doing this. Nothing in my ragged life prepared me for dating in my 70s, let alone falling in love. Day in and day out, Nancy Griffin suffered the rehash of my walks. She was and remains my language guru, dedicated to shortening my sentences. Shadowfax and Tanaya, and this is the only time in the entire book I mentioned their names, gave me reason to walk. Good-naturedly, they tolerated long pauses, sitting patiently at my feet, enthusiastically accompanying me regardless of weather. Their senses extended my own. Although no one would confuse either German Shepherd for Rin Tin Tin, their loyalty guided me through COVID-19. I'm grateful that Jordan and Casey often and patiently listened to me read, frequently over the phone, commented on Jeanette's illustrations in the Coyote Hollow map, as well as my porous memory. My ultimate debt is to them and my stepson, William. They grew up on the untamed shoulder of Robinson Hill. Not exactly the children of wolves, just wild boys who fed off the corrugated landscape. And for 526 days, I tried to follow their example. So I would love to answer any sorts of questions you might have on.
So did you move because of the relationship, or like why did you move?
Well, there was a bunch of things, but probably the biggest factor was I was upright and mobile and able to do it myself. And the real estate in Thetford, like everywhere else in Vermont, was off the wall. People were bidding on my house and property from cell phones, sight unseen. It sold in 48 hours for a lot more than I asked. So for somebody who worked for themselves all their life, it was a real blessing. And miraculously, after 15 tries, I discovered that the way to approach buying a house during COVID was to immediately offer $5,000 more than the highest bid. I would try to lowball it and work my way up, but I was always there in the bottom and it was gone. So it was a learning experience. It took me about 6 weeks after I sold my house to find a place.
So you just wanted to move. Did you go back to the same place to do the same walk?
I know, at that point, I moved to I moved from Coyote Hollow to Hurricane Hill in White River. I just started the walks on Hurricane Hill. And that's like the last 10 pieces in here. It's mostly all from Coyote Hollow. But yeah, it was that, like the book was unplanned. I mean, it just happened like that. Someone said, you could probably sell your place in 24 hours. And I lived near a gun range that for years I was battling with the club that ran the gun range to not shoot on every single weekend. So I was happy to be done with that part of it, but I really do miss my wetland. That was a price. It was a real gift to live there for 24 years. Yeah, Liza.
Could you say a little bit about the process of the illustrations? Did you work with the illustrator? Did they come in because they matched the text?
I met Jeanette long before COVID. She has a gallery in North Woodstock, New Hampshire, And I went to an artist expose at the Marion Cross School on the Green one summer, and she had a booth. And Nancy and I were there, and we were looking at her stuff, and we fell in love with two particular illustrations. And when it came time to find an illustrator, the first person I thought of was my dear friend Joan Waltermeyer, who did my first book. But Joan just said she didn't feel physically able to. And Nancy kept Jeanette's card, which I had lost. So I called her up, and she had always wanted to illustrate a book. So she invited me up to her studio, and I had spiral bound all of the entries from the Substack, unedited, to pass around to publishers and my agent. And I brought one copy up for Jeanette. And we sat there, and I told her that chickadees pop up 100 times. You gotta have a few chickadees. You gotta have a bobcat, you gotta have a black bear, gotta have an otter, and a mink, goshawk, red-shouldered hawk. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. But you know, she did it, and she did it online, and sent it to me online, and I commented on it. You know, for instance, the goshawk has a very, very long tail and very short wings. So I was a stickler for the wings having to match the length of the tail, and she was so gracious about being able to shorten them. And then a couple of things, like the playful Winnie the Pooh-esque map, I sent that to my kids because I wanted them to, you know, weigh in on it. So it sort of went back and forth electronically. She was great to work with. And I can't say enough about her artwork, and if you're ever on your way up the Kankamangas Pass, her studio is in North Woodstock, 500 yards off the beginning of the Kankamangas Pass. And she also has a website, too. Yeah?
What happened to the beaver?
They moved on because they ate all the young aspen trees. And you know, they left, I think, about 4 years into it, they disappeared. Occasionally one would come by, and the Fish and Game Club, which manages the man-made pond across from the wetlands, water comes off Robinson Hill, it was dammed up for the pond, then it empties into the wetland. If the beaver showed up and was plugging up the culvert, they would eliminate it. It was one of the many contentions I had with them.
They have an alternative for that now, so you can save the beavers.
Yes,
Yeah.
I knew about the alternative. I presented it to them, but they didn't want to take the time.
That's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you read the work of other naturalists, other writers that have either influenced you or you find yourself particularly interested
Yes.
in their work? Can you tell us?
Oh, I love the poetry of Mary Oliver. I was a great fan of Edward Abbey, John Burroughs, Hal Borland, David Quammen, somebody more modern. When I was probably in the 5th grade, my parents bought me a book called Wild America, and it was written by Roger Torrey Peterson and James Fisher. And one was a birder from England, and you probably all know who Roger Torrey Peterson was. They got together and they got in a car and they drove all around North America, literally a gigantic loop, went into Sonora, Mexico, the Everglades, Alaska, and they wrote a book about it. And I read that book and thought, oh my God, they're making a living doing this. I could do that. I don't have to go into business with my father. So yeah, I've been reading natural history stuff my whole life. Annie Dillard's Pilgrim Creek is a real favorite.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are you an artist?
No.
You're a photographer.
Well, I used to be. When Linny died, I had 2 little kids and I couldn't go on assignment, so I gave up photography. So I really haven't shot a camera in 25 years.
But do you draw and sketch yourself?
No, I would never call it that. Doodle. It's about the, yeah, not much to it.
You didn't put any doodles in here?
Oh God, no. Yeah.
I was wondering about the
choice not to mention the name of your dogs until the acknowledgement?
Well, that, like everything else in this book, at first wasn't a conscious decision. And I didn't really want to get into the dogs or the relationship to the dogs and what they were doing. And occasionally I'll mention them perking up when deer are bolting across the road. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't. But I was aware that I didn't, and I wanted to make sure I did in the last, literally the last graph of the book. But yeah, it's, I don't know if I have a really good answer for that. One of them, you know, is not with me anymore, and the other one is on his, literally on his last legs. Yeah.
After such a wonderful childhood, what do your sons do?
Casey he's got a doctorate in physical therapy, and he works for a practice in Fruita, Colorado. He's an avid mountain biker, and you know, he's bringing his little kids to see owls at night. And Jordan is a hospitalist in Tacoma and lives in South Seattle. And they are ecologically articulate, even though they didn't choose that for their fields. And their kids are being made ecologically articulate as well. Well, thank you oh, you have a question? Oh. Well, thank you guys very much.